Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The prayer this afternoon will be delivered by Ms. Elsie Harry, a former member of the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association. Ms. Harry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May we bow our heads? Our Father and our God, we are grateful for the opportunity to stand in these hallowed chambers to discuss a matter that is pertinent to the development of our nation. You, God, are just, and you are a defender of the oppressed. As we lift the cause of reparatory justice for our ancestors and for present and future generations, I ask that you grant wisdom and understanding to the youth parliamentarians who will lead this charge today. Help them to uphold the values of honesty, integrity, courage, and temperance. May today's proceedings be conducted decently and in order. May the words spoken here today reach the ears of those with the authority to make meaningful change, and may we all be moved to positive collective action. We ask your continued guidance and your blessings on the Federation of St. Christopher and Nevis. Amen.
You may be seated. This House is now in session.
Confirmation of minutes.
Minutes are deferred.
Messages from the Governor General.
Honorable members, while there is no message from the Governor General, the Youth Assembly is in receipt of a message from Mr. Brian Royce, the campaign manager for the Repair campaign. Permit me now to put that message on the record of this Honorable House. Honorable Speaker, honorable members of Parliament, distinguished members of the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association, and esteemed guests. On behalf of the Repair campaign, I wish to extend sincere commendations to all of the youth parliamentarians here today who have taken the time to research and engage so deeply on this very important and timely debate. In light of the increased momentum in the global reparatory justice movement, securing justice for the Caribbean is a matter of great urgency. And as this parliamentary sitting will demonstrate, the future of this movement is in good hands. We are deeply encouraged by the thought, leadership, and decisive action which the youth debaters, the leaders of tomorrow, have shown throughout this process, and look forward to the critical discussions you will engage in today. The most powerful way to strengthen this movement towards achieving intergenerational and lasting impact is for our young leaders to take up the mantle and carry forward the charge for justice. As we will hear from today's resolution, reparations beyond simply monetary compensation is a process of healing and repairing the ongoing harms of colonialism with justice for past crimes and equitable opportunities for future development at the heart of this struggle. This very gathering is a significant step towards that internal repair which is needed to educate and empower citizens of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis and the broader Caribbean to lead on this issue. It is also critical to establishing the legislative frameworks and galvanizing political action in pursuit and implementation of reparatory justice guided by the CARICOM 10-point plan. Over the coming months and years, we eagerly look forward to seeing the fruitful outcomes of this continued education, advocacy, and action as we remain firmly committed to pursuing reparatory justice from the former colonial governments and institutions which benefited from chattel enslavement. To conclude, we are inspired by your leadership and are deeply grateful for the commitment and passion you continue to show to this cause. The movement is stronger because of you and the discussions you will have today. And we look forward to the lasting impact your work will have on generations to come. Sincerely, Brian Royce, Campaign Manager, the Repair Campaign. Honourable members, may we thank Mr. Royce for this message.
Announcement by Speaker.
Honourable members, just a few announcements. Once again, honourable colleagues, distinguished supporters, our partners at the Repair Campaign, well-wishers and friends, good afternoon. Carrie Jones once said, "The secret of happiness is freedom. The secret of freedom is courage." Although our forefathers fought valiantly for their lives, for their rights, and for their very dignity, denied by those who sought it fit to declare their bodies as economic chattel, their bravery and I dare say courage to fight each day in part delivered their freedom. A freedom that in some ways continued to elude them, and through true perseverance, a courage abided therein. And that now lies with us, unwavering, poignant, and deeply embedded within our fibers. Today, the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association, as it has for nigh 25 years, embarks on a mission to educate, edify, evaluate, I say enunciate, and express the views of young people from across our beloved federation on the timely issue of reparations. Before I continue, however, I must place on the record of this assembly the enormous recognition and gratitude of this association to the Repair Campaign. Over the past months, we have developed a relationship that has seen training, education, and renewed mindsets eager to contribute to the sheer abiding courage of generations past. Therefore, as we discuss this topic, I ask all members to be frank, within the bounds of the standing orders, of course, evaluate areas for improvement within our socioeconomic frameworks, and discover the issues surrounding reparations from a youth perspective for young people, by young people, and in an effort to bolster the equality and justice within our nations that we hold dear. I look forward to a respectful, thorough, and edifying debate, and wish each of you the very best. Thank you. Honourable members, before we proceed to the next item on the order paper, please allow me to place firstly on record an apology received from the Honourable Minister of Finance, who will join us later in these proceedings. Additionally, allow me to recognize the scores of supporters who join us physically here in the gallery, and I especially want to recognize our partners from the Repair Campaign, Ms. Carla Astafan, Ms. Elsie Harry, Mrs. Taliba Byron Shiverton, as well as a very good colleague of mine, Mr. Ras Ayer, who I see sitting in the gallery as well, and to the students and past members of the association, parents who have joined us for today's proceedings. Thank you for your presence.
Presentation of papers and of reports from committees. Petitions. Government notices. Unofficial notices. Questions. Requests for leave to move for the adjournment of the National Assembly are matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business of the National Assembly and moved by a minister. Introduction of bills and the first reading. Public business, bills, second reading. Motions. Resolutions.
I recognize the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister of National Security.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I seek your leave to have adopted in this sitting of the Youth Assembly a resolution by the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association advocating for reparatory justice, a youth call for decisive action. Mr. Speaker, beneath this soil are the remains of people whose names we may never know. Apologies, I got so excited. My apologies, I got so excited.
I was getting ready to bring you back.
I just got so excited, apologies. Let me pull up the resolution. Whereas it is well established that under the common law of the United Kingdom, the enslavement of individuals was legal within the British Empire, leading to the unjust, inhumane, and forced removal of over 12 million Africans from the African continent to the Western Hemisphere. And understanding the role that these enslaved individuals, deprived of liberty, rights, and identity, played in the development of the early British colonies, the 18th century British economy, trade, and thereafter the financing of the Industrial Revolution, which has definitively been linked as a driving force behind the present climate crisis, as well as entrenching its injustices. And cognizant of the impact that this point in history has had on the slow development of some Caribbean and African nations, the long-standing erasure of culture, the impact on generational health and wealth, and recalling that in 1772, the practice of enslavement in the decided case of Somerset and Stuart was outlawed in England, having been found to be contrary to the common law. And recalling further that the Parliament of the United Kingdom would ban the trading of enslaved individuals within the empire in 1807, recalling with concern that while the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 guaranteed the right of freedom for the enslaved within the United Kingdom and its colonies, it provided compensation only to the owners of the enslaved, who were seen to be chattel rather than human beings deprived of freedom, including scores of planters within the then colonies of St. Christopher and Nevis, whose detailed financial claims each remain within the annals of history. And troubled by the continued societal pressures that this chain of historical events has caused, that have led to the United Nations 2001 declaration that slavery and the slave trade are crimes against humanity and should have always been so, the effects of which continue to manifest in structural inequality, underdevelopment, and racial injustice. And noting that on March 25th, 2026, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution acknowledging that the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans was the gravest crime against humanity. May we, the National Youth Assembly of St. Christopher and Nevis, call for 1. The full and unreserved implementation of the Caribbean community's 10-point plan on reparations. 2. The immediate exploration of avenues for the pursuit of reparations for damages arising from the past and the continuing negative effects of climate change on St. Kitts and Nevis, as well as a small island developing state, attributable to grave environmental impacts of the post-industrial revolution, financed by the proceeds of the trafficking of enslaved Africans and unfairly affecting the descendants of the former enslaved, now inhabiting small island developing states. 3. The creation of legislation to govern the management of reparations resources locally. 4. The establishment of a national reparations recovery fund that shall include 5% annual participatory budget. 5. education campaigns, and public awareness on the ongoing issues connected to the trafficking of enslaved Africans. The immediate introduction of reparations curriculum across educational institutions, shifting learning away from the present Eurocentric historical perspectives to a wider encompassing framework, inclusive of foundational, broad-based African and Caribbean history. 7. The development of independent research and analysis funded by the National Reparations Recovery Fund into the existence of epigenetic trauma inheritance caused by the repeated, irreparable physical and psychosocial harm faced by the enslaved, now passed to the present-day descendants, in an effort to discover the extent to which these traumas affect descendants, while unlocking initiatives for relief through trained, supportive intervention and awareness. 8. Strengthen institutional support for youth activities surrounding reparations awareness, targeted socio-economic youth intervention to curb the continued social impact of enslavement and to bolster youth involvement in the decisions surrounding allocations of recovered reparations. 9. The adoption of foreign policy that supports the causes of African and Caribbean states in the pursuit of justice at multilateral institutions and tribunals for the wrongs associated with the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans. And 10. The creation of legislation to establish the National Reparations Commission as a body corporate, thus enabling its place as the Federation's point of contact for the historical research, document coordination, artifact recovery, and financial accounting of the proceeds of recovered reparations. And be it further resolved that this youth assembly strongly affirms that reparatory justice is not an act of charity, but a matter of legal, moral, and historical obligation owing to the people of the Caribbean, restoring the ills endured by generations past and equipping future generations to overcome lasting injustices. All right, now it's my turn now. Mr. Speaker, beneath this soil are the remains of people whose names we may never know, but whose lives have shaped the world we live in today. Their labor built vast sugar estates, fed empires, and created wealth they were never allowed to share in. They endured a system that treated them as chattel and not as human beings. Yet, we, the descendants of our enslaved African ancestors, are constantly told that freedom alone from the transatlantic slave trade should be enough to pay for its atrocities. But, Mr. Speaker, freedom without reparations is not justice, and this government firmly rejects that. Drawing on the work of Professor Vereen Shepherd, who reminds us that reparation means making amends for a wrong. That can include restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees that such harm is never repeated. So, this able-bodied government is not using reparations as a guise for money or to collect money. Instead, we are seeking from our former colonial masters, don't want to use the word masters, repair, truth, dignity, and accountability to the many descendants of enslaved Africans on the transatlantic slave trade. And Mr. Speaker, we must be honest about the wrongdoings. More than 12.5 million people were forcibly taken from their homes and trafficked across the Atlantic over hundreds of years, over 300 years. They were kidnapped, bought, sold, brutalized, and forced to work as property. Here in St. Kitts and Nevis, the history is not abstract. St. Kitts is known as the mother colony of the West Indies and Nevis as the queen of the Caribbean because of the wealth sugar produced for Britain. But that wealth did not appear on its own. It came from the labor, suffering, and the cost of the lives of enslaved Africans. The plantations here in St. Kitts and Nevis and even across the region helped feed British wealth, from estates to banks to insurance and industries that we know here today. Mr. Speaker, as you can see, the slave trade was brutal, but unfortunately the injustice did not end at its abolition. When slavery was abolished in the British Empire in 1834, the British government found £20 million to compensate, not the slaves, but to compensate slave owners for the so-called loss of property. That debt was not fully paid off until 2015. Let that settle for a moment, everybody in this honorable house. 20 million. The enslavers were compensated, the enslaved were not. My ancestors, our ancestors, received no land, no payment, no apology, and no real support to rebuild their lives, even though they were forced to be taken from their home. From this, we have seen the many generational challenges that affect us as African descendant families today. So, when people say, oh, you know, too much time has passed, we must ask, if 2015 was recent enough for British taxpayers to finish paying a debt tied to slavery, why is it too late for the descendants of the enslaved to ask for repair? And Mr. Speaker, this call for reparatory justice is not news to St. Kitts and Nevis. This is not the first time that we are having these national discussions. For years, local voices have argued that our country must take this issue seriously. As early as 2008, there were calls for parliamentary action to begin the process of seeking compensation for centuries of unpaid African labor. After the Regional Reparations Conference in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 2013, Kittitian advocate Ras Dabo Penny called for a local reparations committee to help shape and represent the national position. That same year, then Prime Minister Dr. Denzel Douglas supported CARICOM's call for reparations at the United Nations. In 2014, the federal cabinet approved the formation of a reparations committee with representation expected from the Rastafarian community, churches, trade unions, educators, historians, legal profession, and reparations advocates. In 2015, then Prime Minister Dr. Timothy Harris also publicly supported the call. And now today, under this present government, the issue remains part of our national and regional conversation. So, Mr. Speaker, I listed out that timeline to show that reparatory justice in St. Kitts and Nevis is not a partisan issue. It does not belong to one government, one party, or one generation. It has been carried by community advocates, Rastafarians, historians, regional leaders, you name it. So, Mr. Speaker, I would find it very interesting when members of the opposite suddenly develop selective amnesia whenever this topic comes up. Some of them, as the history has laid out, some of them have supported reparations before they crossed the aisle. Apparently, crossing the aisle also crossed all parts of their memory. And Mr. Speaker, you know, I recall when I was in the supermarket and a member opposite, I won't name them, they approached me and said, PM, I really don't want to debate against this bill, this resolution, because it's against me. It's against me. And all they could have said to that person on the opposite, let your conscience guide you. And perhaps have a space over here for you, but let your conscience guide you. So once again, for those who wish to oppose, when I stand up here, when we stand up here, when the country stands up here and speaks about reparations, we are not talking about begging or asking our former colonial powers to feel sorry for us. We are asking for a serious response to a serious wrong, and we all know it's a serious wrong. We are asking for repair where there was exploitation, recognition where there was denial, and justice where there has been silence. Some may argue that we've already received aid, grants, or concessions from former colonial powers, but aid and reparations are not the same thing. Aid helps manage symptoms. Reparations address the cause. Aid says, here's some assistance. Reparations says, a wrong was done. And Mr. Speaker, I know some members of opposite, they may get uncomfortable when history starts demanding accountability. They prefer history the way that some students prefer group projects. Enjoy all the benefits, contribute very little, and hope nobody asks questions at the end. But history is asking questions. Moreover, reparations have been paid before. Germany paid reparations after the Holocaust. The United Nations compensated Japanese Americans interned during the Second World War. The United Kingdom reached a settlement with Kenyan victims of torture and abuse during the Mau Mau uprising. So what about us? So the argument that reparations is impossible really means one of two things. Either people do not know history, or they hope you do not know history. Mr. Speaker, the real question before this House is not whether the pain of history still matters. It is whether this country is prepared to treat that history seriously enough to act on it. And this resolution does that. It does not ask us to make a speech, post a photo, collect a few Facebook comments, and pretend we solve centuries of injustice by sunset. It asks us to build policy around repair. It supports the full implementation of CARICOM's 10-point plan. It calls for proper legislation, a National Reparations Commission, a reparations recovery fund, public education, curriculum reform, youth involvement, research, and a stronger national voice in the international movement for reparatory justice. That matters because reparations cannot live only in emotion. If we are serious, they must live in our laws, in our institutions, in our classrooms, in our budgets, in our foreign policy, and of course in our developmental planning. And St. Kitts and Nevis is not starting from nowhere, Mr. Speaker. You pointed out to Carla Astafan, and she has been doing an excellent job in terms of the National Reparations Committee, which has been building public awareness and support. Our representatives have already carried this issue into international spaces and connected reparatory justice to sustainable development, economic justice, and the future of small island states. This resolution gives that work that has continued a stronger national footing. Mr. Speaker, it also recognizes something that we cannot ignore. Climate justice and reparatory justice are connected. The same global systems that extracted wealth from Caribbean slavery helped fuel an industrial model that now leaves small islands like ours paying for rising seas, stronger storms, coastal erosion, coral bleaching, and adaptation costs we did not create. We cannot keep calling that resilience when the bill is being passed to those who benefit least and suffered most. That is why reparations belong on the national development agenda. It belongs in education because our children deserve truth, not a version of history written to flatter empire. It belongs in finance because stolen labor became stolen wealth. It belongs in health and social development because trauma does not disappear simply because the law changes. And it belongs in foreign affairs because St. Kitts and Nevis cannot pursue this alone. Mr. Speaker, reparations is not revenge, it's repair. It's not about blaming ordinary people today for crimes that they did not personally commit. It's about holding states, institutions, companies, and systems accountable for wealth and advantage built for the suffering of others. And it's also not about reopening old wounds. It's about finally treating the wounds that were never properly healed. So, Mr. Speaker, a world that found money to compensate enslavers but found nothing for the enslaved has no moral authority to tell the descendants of enslaved Africans to move on. So today, this government is asking this Honorable Assembly to support this resolution, not as symbolism, but as a serious national commitment to reparations. May it please the Mr. Speaker.
I thank the Honourable Prime Minister, who spoke for a time of 10 minutes and 50 seconds. I will grant you leave for those additional 50 seconds. I recognize the Honourable Kurjay Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, I second that motion and I reserve my right to speak.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I recognize the Honourable Leader of Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I promise I won't take up your time with a lot of buzzwords as so echoed so eloquently by the Honourable Prime Minister this good afternoon. Mr. Speaker, members of this Honourable House, strangers, young people far and near, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. It was Director General of the OECS, Dr. Didicus Jules, echoing Professor Justin Robinson's quote, who said, "No one is coming to save us. And this is why we must save ourselves." And that is not pessimism, Mr. Speaker. That is reality. Because for too long, small states like ours have been conditioned to wait to wait on powerful nations, to wait on fairness, to wait on a system that was never designed with us in mind. And as my dearest friend, Dr. Jules, who I met when I, not too long ago, went on a trip, he said, the rules-based order we were taught to trust bends when it becomes inconvenient for the powerful. So then, if we are not prepared to stand up for ourselves, Mr. Speaker, then we will continue to be stood upon. And it is on that premise that I rise today. Firstly, to address the issue of reparations, not simply as a historical claim, but as a present-day necessity, including the need to reform the very systems we inherit, particularly education. Secondly, to speak on the urgent need for Caribbean unity. And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, to make it abundantly clear that while history explains our challenges, it must not be used as an excuse for present-day mismanagement, as so eloquently outlined by the Honourable Prime Minister today. I must agree with the government in saying that there is indeed a necessity for decisive action towards reparatory justice, because it is a historical fact that our former colonizers contributed significantly to the underdevelopment of their former colonies. Haiti stands today as one of the clearest examples of this reality. And it is also a fact, Mr. Speaker, that the exploitation of enslaved Africans and the extraction of wealth from the Caribbean helped finance the Industrial Revolution, an industrial revolution whose consequence we're still paying for today through climate change, economic inequality, and structural disadvantage. So when small island developing states like ours now face rising sea levels, intensifying hurricanes, coastal erosions, and economic vulnerability, we must acknowledge that these issues did not emerge in a vacuum. They are tied to a historical system that enriched some nations while impoverishing others. And that, Mr. Speaker, is why reparatory justice cannot merely be dismissed as a conversation about the past, because its effects are still much alive in the present. However, Mr. Speaker, if this Honourable House is truly serious about reparatory justice, then this resolution cannot be washy-washy, inconsistent, or merely performative, because the issues outlined in this resolution are far too serious for symbolic politics and empty declarations. The Caribbean people demand decisive action, coordinated action, and most importantly, united action. And on that point, Mr. Speaker, I cannot leave again this Honourable House without calling for a united Caribbean effort, a one Caribbean movement, not only in the pursuit of reparatory justice, but in the defense of our collective interests as a region. Because now more than ever, our unity, our collectivism, is being tested and threatened. Mr. Speaker, the European Union commands influence because independent nations understood that unity creates strength. The United States remains a global force because 50 individual states operate under one collective framework. California alone, if it stood independently, would rank among the largest economies in the world. So I ask this Honourable House, who are we to remain so divided? Who are we to allow external interests, political agendas, and foreign pressures to keep the Caribbean fragmented? This is why I fully support the call for a coordinated regional action and a unified foreign policy stance when dealing with foreign aggression and external pressures. Because if countries, political parties, or foreign movements believe they can impose restrictions, limitations, or intimidation upon Caribbean states simply because we demand justice, then our response cannot come from isolated islands speaking separately. It must come from a united Caribbean speaking with one voice. So in closing, Mr. Speaker, I told you I promise I won't be as long as the honourable member opposite. I return to the very statement upon which I began. No one is coming to save us. And whether we like it or not, That is the reality confronting the Caribbean today. No powerful nation is coming to develop our economies for us. No foreign government is coming to unite this region for us. And no international system that bends when it becomes inconvenient for the powerful will suddenly transform itself in our favor. That responsibility rests with us. It rests with us to demand reparatory justice with courage and consistency. It rests with us to reform the systems we inherit so that they better serve Caribbean people. And most importantly, Mr. Speaker, it rests with us to finally recognize that a divided Caribbean will always struggle to command respect in a rapidly changing world. Because if history has taught us anything, it is that fragmentation weakens us while unity strengthens us. So let us leave this resolution not as another symbolic gesture or parliamentary performance. Let it instead mark the beginning of decisive regional action. Action rooted in justice, accountability, and Caribbean solidarity. And if there's one thing I hope this Honorable House remembers today is that no one is coming to save us. Then we must save ourselves. Not as separate islands, not as competing governments, but as one Caribbean people, speaking with one voice, standing with one purpose, and moving toward one future. Mr. Speaker, if it pleases you, and if it pleases this Honorable House.
Thank you, Honorable Leader of Opposition. Before we continue, please permit me to recognize Ms. Mervan Thompson, Mr. Vernon Wilkinson, as well as Ms. Vernaldine Francis, who are also joining us today as part of the Repair campaign. We thank you for your presence here today. I recognize the Honorable Attorney General, Minister of Justice and Legal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in this honorable House as a member of this honorable government to give my honorable views on this honorable and, might I say, historic resolution. As Attorney General and Minister of Legal and Justice Affairs, I speak particularly to clauses 3 and 10, because my ministry is primarily tasked with overseeing the creation of legislation to govern reparations resources and the establishment of a National Reparations Commission as a body corporate. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker. Reparatory justice is not charity. It is a legal, moral, and historical obligation. The transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans has been recognized by the United Nations as a crime against humanity, a crime that carries no statute of limitations. The lasting effects of this crime, stolen labor, erased culture, generational trauma, and systemic underdevelopment continue to shape our reality today. And so to underpin our legal efforts in this fight, we have studied the best practices of our CARICOM brothers, because our leader of opposition says he wants a united approach. And so we have studied our CARICOM brothers and sisters, and we are building intelligently on proven models. We must get this right from the beginning. Reparations, when they come, will represent significant resources belonging to the people of this nation. And we cannot afford ad hoc management or any perception of impropriety. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, what clause 3 of this resolution calls for is the enactment of comprehensive legislation that will establish clear principles for the receipt, management, investment, and disbursement of reparations funds, create mechanisms for transparency, accountability, and independent oversight, and ensure that funds are strictly for national priorities such as education reform, health equity, cultural restoration, economic empowerment, and climate resilience, and prevent the misuse while allowing flexibility for strategic long-term investments. We have examined the approaches of our neighbors. Barbados established their National Task Force on Reparations, focused on research and advocacy. Jamaica, Mr. Speaker, created National Commission on Reparations through Cabinet Resolution. And Guyana, we see, has pursued a development-oriented model through its Reparations Committee. But we here in SKN are saying we will go further. After wide-scale stakeholder consultation, we will create and enact dedicated legislation, a Reparations Resources Management Act, that will create a statutory framework with legal safeguards, reporting requirements, and parliamentary oversight, Mr. Speaker. This will ensure that every dollar received is accounted for, transparently managed, and invested in long-term development of our people. This is responsible governance, Mr. Speaker. This is nation building done properly. We are not purporting to act illegally. We are building strongly. Lawful institutions from the ground up, so that when reparations arrive, we are ready to manage them with integrity and maximum benefit for our citizens. Mr. Speaker, Clause 10 of this resolution reposit complements Clause 3 through the establishment of the National Reparations Commission as a body corporate. Once established, the Commission will serve as the Federation's official, central, and authoritative point of contact for all matters relating to reparatory justice. And as a body corporate, it will have the full legal personality with the power to sue and be sued, enter contracts, own property, and engage internationally on behalf of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, the Commission will be responsible for historical research on the full impact of the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans, document coordination, artifact recovery, financial management, establishing and managing the national reparations funds with full transparency and oversight, investing in education, health, culture, etc., Mr. Speaker. This commission will operate independently, professionally, and with the highest level of accountability. It is not, and it will not be, a political football, but a permanent technocratic institution working in the long-term interests of our people. This is not reckless policy making. This is strategic nation building, I re-emphasize, Mr. Speaker. And so to those who say we should move on, or that it is too expensive, lest we forget, Mr. Speaker, and my Prime Minister iterated it, Britain compensated slave owners in 1833 with $20 million, but nothing to the enslaved, Mr. Speaker. The Industrial Revolution, financed by the blood and unpaid labor of our ancestors, created the wealth that now drives the climate crisis we are forced to bear. I see sitting opposite climate advocates, Mr. Speaker. We are not asking for favors. We are demanding justice, Mr. Speaker. And in this government, we have the courage and vision to say, we will not be silent. We will not prepare ourselves. We will build the institutions necessary to receive and manage what is rightfully ours. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Attorney General. I recognize the Honorable Jamal Gums.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today not to oppose reparatory justice, the call for reparatory justice, but please, I would like it noted that I entered these chambers donning my African regalia in support of it. So it should be to nobody's surprise that I'm not opposing. The transatlantic trade was a crime against humanity. Its wounds remain open. The descendants of the enslaved deserve some form of compensation. But support for a cause does not mean blind endorsement of any and every document placed before us this evening. The opposition will ultimately agree to this evening's resolution. However, we will be failing our duty if we did not first place on the record several serious concerns about what this resolution says, as well as what it fails to say. Let me walk you through them. Firstly, the imported definitions and missing local homework. The resolution uses powerful language, structural inequality, societal issues, racial injustice, underdevelopment. The government will tell me that these terms are defined within the CARICOM 10-point plan, which this resolution cites. That is true. The plan cited does important work. It gives shape to a broad concepts, and I acknowledge that. But here's my concern, Mr. Speaker. Where in this resolution, or in any document presented in this assembly, is the SKNIS specific deal? The 10-point plan speaks of public health crisis linked to slavery's legacy. What does that crisis look like between Basse-Terre and Kenyon? What are the local literacy rates amongst our communities? What is the specific unemployment figure for young descendants of enslaved families across the Federation? A resolution that cites regional frameworks but does no local homework is a resolution that has outsourced its thinking. We could do better than that. Even a statement of intent should show that its authors have looked within at local data, not just regional reports. Secondly, language that confuses more than clarifies. The resolution uses the term epigenetic trauma inheritance. Mr. Speaker, I might understand the science behind this term, but what about the regular citizen in St. Kitts? Research does suggest that trauma can affect gene expression across generations, but this is a Parliament resolution meant to be read amongst the public, not a medical journal. If our goal is to educate and mobilize, we should use language that the ordinary Kittitian division can understand without a dictionary. Generational trauma or inherited suffering, these are phrases that would serve the same purpose but with greater accessibility. More troubling, Mr. Speaker, is the resolution's word restore. The resolution says that harm caused by slavery is irreparable. Yet in the same breath, it calls for restoring the ills endured by generations. Mr. Speaker, you cannot restore the irreparable. If a vase shattered into dust, you cannot restore it. If a forest burnt into ash, you cannot restore it. You can mourn it. You could possibly build something new in its place. You could compensate for the loss, but you cannot restore what is beyond repair. The correct word is not restore. It is redress or remedy or correct. Those words acknowledge the depth of the harm while still demanding action. Restore pretends that we could go back. But Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the members opposite that we cannot go back. We must move forward. This is not pedantry, Mr. Speaker. It is respect for the seriousness of the subject. Victims of atrocity deserve precise language. Sloppy drafting diminishes the cause, not honors it. If the government cannot get its wording right in a resolution, how can we trust it to get policy right in legislation? Thirdly, the fantasy of the word immediate found in the resolution. The resolution demands the immediate introduction of reparations curriculums in schools across the Federation. Immediate, not expedited, not prioritized, but immediate. Mr. Speaker, that word sounds passionate, but it cannot be taken serious. Who writes this curriculum? Which teachers are trained to deliver it? What existing subjects are reduced to make room? What is the budget for textbooks, for teacher training, for assessment? The government might say that this is just a resolution, but a resolution that uses the word immediate is setting a timeline, and that timeline, Mr. Speaker, is impossible. Educational reform, of this scale takes years of planning, consultation, piloting, and revision. To suggest otherwise is naive or dishonest. Let us replace the word immediate with expedited or prioritized. Let us be truthful about what is achievable. Good intentions do not excuse unrealistic demands. And in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, despite these concerns, the opposition will humbly not block this resolution. We believe that this cause is just. We believe the conversation must continue. We believe that this assembly has a role in keeping reparatory justice on the national agenda. But we enter our support with our eyes open. We enter it with these critiques on record. We ask that the government go back and do the local homework. Give us SKN specific data, not just regional frameworks. We ask them that they use precise language. Reparatory justice is too important for sloppy resolutions. The cause deserves our best thinking, our most honest drafting, and our most rigorous scrutiny. We support the resolution, but we hold the government accountable to the high standards that this subject demands. If it may please you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Education, Youth Empowerment and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, this evening I rise in full support of the resolution before this Honourable House, advocating for reparatory justice for the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, and by extension, the wider Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, reparations are not about charity. They are not about handouts. They're not about dwelling on the past. Reparations seek justice. They're about accountability. They're about repairing the enduring damage caused by the gravest crime in humanity. Mr. Speaker, if a people do not understand their history, they cannot fully understand themselves. For far too long, Caribbean history has been taught through the Eurocentric lens, one which sanitizes slavery, glorifies colonizers, and reduces our ancestors to footnotes in someone else's history. This government plans to reshape national consciousness through transformation. We must reshape how our people, especially our youth, understand our history, our identity, and our place in the world. Under clauses 5 and 6, the administration supports the integration of reparations education into the national curriculum through the Ministry of Education, ensuring that African and Caribbean history are taught in a broader and more accurate context from the primary to tertiary level. Mr. Speaker, our support of the introduction of a reparations curriculum in our schools is not an exercise in division, but it is an investment in truth, identity, justice, and national consciousness. For far too long, we've been fighting imbalance, and a reparations curriculum seeks to correct this imbalance. This initiative is not about teaching hatred. It is about teaching history honestly. Mr. Speaker, education must prepare our students not only for employment, but for citizenship. A child who understands the history of the transatlantic trafficking, indigenous displacement, and post-colonial development is better equipped to understand the inequalities and realities that still affect Caribbean societies today. The reshaping of our consciousness will include the revision of social studies and history syllabi to include reparations, Caribbean resistance movements, and the economic legacy of slavery. Teaching training workshops to equip educators to deliver this content effectively, and public awareness campaigns in partnership with media houses, youth groups, and community organizations during emancipation and independence activities. Our people must recognize that slavery did not simply happen, but that its consequences are still with us. Mr. Speaker, we must teach that the wealth of Europe was built on Caribbean exploitation. Mr. Speaker, the slave registers meticulously recorded every single enslaved person by name, age, birthplace, gender, and status, not to honor their humanity, but to catalog them as property, so enslavers could claim compensation for their bodies. That is the brutal truth of our history. We cannot escape it. And when emancipation came, they were freed into poverty. They were given nothing, not even a cup of water. Mr. Speaker, meanwhile, Britain paid over 20 million euros to enslavers for their so-called loss of property. What about our loss? Mr. Speaker, how can we expect our people to move forward when so many have not been taught the full truth of what was done to us? We cannot build a strong national identity on incomplete history. We must understand that slavery was not simply an unfortunate chapter in history. It was a deliberate economic system that enriched empires while impoverishing ours. Mr. Speaker, some on the other side may ask, why revisit this painful history? The answer is simple: healing requires acknowledgement. This government rejects the false notion that teaching historical injustice creates division. In fact, ignorance creates division, while education creates awareness. Mr. Speaker, Clause 8 of the resolution recognizes that youth must play a direct role in all aspects of the reparations movement. Why? Because the young people of this federation will inherit the society that reparatory justice seeks to repair. They are not spectators, they are essential participants. The government supports the institutionalization of youth participation through practical mechanisms such as youth representation on future national reparations commissions, youth advisory panels attached to the Ministry of Youth Empowerment, and annual national reparation forums where young people can directly engage policymakers. Mr. Speaker, our federation already has a strong culture of youth civic engagement through platforms such as our very own, the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association. This proves that young people are capable of serious policy-making discussion and national contribution. Young people must be active participants because they will inherit the outcomes of these policies. Mr. Speaker, beyond economic exploitation, slavery inflicted another devastating wound: cultural erasure. African people were stripped of their language, religions, traditions, names, their identity on a hold. Their objective was clear: to sever people from their roots and make them easier to dominate. And although slavery has ended, their effects persist. To confront this issue, we intend to use reparatory justice to invest in cultural preservation and historical restoration. In fact, to demonstrate our commitment, just recently, our government, in partnership with brothers and sisters from Africa, flew 100 persons, including one of our members opposite, from RLB to Nigeria. We know that many on the opposition had a lot to say. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? We built a bridge and a connection that will have far-reaching impact for our generations, and more to come. Our artists have paintings hanging in art galleries in Abuja. Our local stars such as Mr. Mention, Tubop, Drop It Man Brandon, and King Druzy showcase their talents on the African continent.
Honorable Member, I'm going to ask you to start winding up.
I know. So while they on the other side are talking,
We on this side are working. We are putting in the money where our mouth is. We are investing in our people. As Esther Phillips so powerfully stated, there are spirits of the victims of slavery present in this room at this moment, and they are looking on to see what we are going to do. Mr. Speaker, let history record that when called to act upon, we did not remain silent. We stood for justice, we stood for truth, and we stood for reparatory action. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Minister of Education. Permit me to acknowledge the presence of Ms. Naima Hazel, Permanent Secretary in the Prime Minister's Office, and also to correct something for the record. Earlier I mentioned that Carla Astafan is a part of the Repair campaign, but she's also the chair of the St. Kitts Nevis Reparations Commission. I wish to recognize now the Honorable Kwanje Robinson, member for St. Christopher II.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, distinguished visitors in the gallery, and all under the sound of my voice, good afternoon. There are spirits of the victims of slavery present in this room at this moment, and they are listening for one word only: justice. Because for them and for the world, there can be no peace without justice, reparatory justice, and that call is answered only when words are turned into action. Those were the words of Esther Phillips of Barbados, and I echo them because they ring deep. Though the movement resonates, I rise as a member of the opposition and a climate advocate, per the Attorney General, to ensure that this resolution leaves this chamber not only morally powerful, but strong enough to be defended wherever justice is contested. This resolution already begins that pursuit. My concern is ensuring that the pursuit has direction, evidence, and a resting place in the actual transformation of our people. The resolution is strong, Mr. Speaker. It recognizes enslavement not as an isolated event, but as a system that shaped the economic foundation of empires, financed the Industrial Revolution, and continues to influence development, inequality, and vulnerability. Critically, it extends that history into the climate crisis we now face. The same systems that extracted from our ancestors placed unprecedented strain on our natural world. And we, as small island developing states, now suffer the consequences of a crisis we did not create. Despite contributing less than 1% of global emissions, we remain among the most exposed to its impacts. Climate justice tells us that this imbalance exists. Reparatory justice tells us that it creates an obligation. If we are to strengthen this resolution beyond its moral force, this connection cannot only be asserted, it must be proven. We must show who emitted, who remains exposed, and how those facts strengthen our claim for repair. Mr. Speaker, the Caribbean has long advanced reparatory justice to the CARICOM 10-point plan, and this resolution rightly calls for its full and unreserved implementation. But while the plan gives the region its claim, it does not tell St. Kitts and Nevis where recovered resources should land. This is the work of a national framework. Alignment with the Sustainable Island State Agenda therefore becomes essential. ensuring that what we secure is placed where it can meaningfully change the conditions our people live under. The resolution calls for a National Reparations Recovery Fund and a National Reparations Commission as a body corporate. These necessary steps provide structure, but structure alone does not determine direction. If this resolution is to work beyond the page, that direction must be grounded in CISA. Resources secured must strengthen our energy, water, food, and the systems that underpin our resilience. In this way, the Commission becomes the mechanism, while CISA defines the vision. Mr. Speaker, even direction is not enough. Countries like ours are classified as high income, and by that classification alone, are presumed to possess resilience that does not reflect our lived reality. Yet, we remain vulnerable to climate shocks, and this disconnect has real consequences. That is where the multidimensional vulnerability index becomes necessary. The MVI captures what income alone hides: our exposure, our fragility, and limited room to absorb disaster after disaster. It gives our lived reality a language that financing systems are forced to read. Government, pay attention. In climate finance, justice is not only argued through history, it is demonstrated through evidence. The United Nations Environment Program has indicated that developing countries require hundreds of billions of dollars annually for adaptation. Yet, the money reaching countries like ours remains nowhere near what we truly need. So, when we speak about the MVI, we are refusing to let income classification erase vulnerability and producing evidence for rooms where our reality is too often dismissed. Mr. Speaker, let us be clear about what we are fighting for. As I close, we are not fighting for funds to sit in accounts or for commissions to exist on paper. We are fighting because something was taken from us, from our ancestors, from our land, and from our future. And what we face today through climate change is not separate from that loss. It is a continuation. This is coastlines disappearing, Mr. Speaker, water becoming harder to secure, and food systems under pressure. If justice does not change that reality, then justice remains unfulfilled. Mr. Speaker, this is not a system that hands out justice. It must be argued, justified, and fought for. That is why this resolution cannot be treated as an endpoint. Reparatory justice, climate justice, vulnerability, and development come from the same imbalance. Mr. Speaker, at the end of this all, the question is not whether this resolution seeks justice. It does. The question is where that pursuit is made to land. I am not veering away from reparatory justice. So let it be clear. I am insisting that reparatory justice must be made deliverable. Let this resolution advance, but let it advance with direction. Justice is fulfilled when the repair is secured, directed, and felt in the lives of those who inherited the harm. Because reparatory justice must not only answer history, it must significantly alter the significant conditions history has left behind. Mr. Speaker, may it please you.
I thank the Honourable Member for St. Christopher II for his presentation. Before we proceed, please allow me to acknowledge the presence of the Honourable Dr. Terence Drew, Prime Minister of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Thank you for joining us. I recognize the Honourable Kayleona Robin, Minister of Health, Social Development and Gender Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, distinguished guests, and my fellow Kittians and Divisions, good afternoon. Mr. Speaker, I rise today not simply as a member of this most august house, but as a daughter of the soil, as someone whose veins carry the blood of people who were brought to these islands in chains, stripped of their name, their language, their humanity, their spirituality, and were told to be grateful for their freedom when it finally came, and it came with nothing. Not land, not compensation, not even an apology. So when the opposition asks whether this government should actively pursue reparations, I respond with one question: how dare we not? Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Health, Social Development, and Gender Affairs, I stand before this House in full support of this resolution. Reparations are a legal and moral obligation. Reparations are public health necessity, and reparations are the greatest investment that we can make for the future of our people. In 1833, the British Parliament passed the Slavery Abolition Act. While our ancestors were emancipated, the enslavers were compensated. Britain paid millions of pounds to plantation owners for the loss of enslaved Africans who had labored, suffered, and died in these very islands. The descendants of these enslaved Africans received absolutely nothing. The enslaved were free, but apparently the enslavers needed emotional support. Payment. More disturbingly, Mr. Speaker, my colleague mentioned it earlier, the British government only finished repaying the loans used to compensate slave owners in 2015. Mr. Speaker, at that time, some of us in this very room were still in primary school, while Britain was settling debts for the enslavers, not the enslaved, the enslavers. Mr. Speaker, the opposition may ask whether there is legal standings. I suspect their Google search history last night became very legal very quickly. Britain's own parliamentary records list by name every enslaver in St. Kitts and Nevis who received compensation. Every plantation claim was documented. Every payment was recorded. The evidence exists in official archives. And the world is beginning to recognize this injustice. And on March 25th of this very year, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a landmark resolution declaring the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans to be among the gravest crimes against humanity. St. Kitts and Nevis voted in favor alongside the wider CARICOM region, and that vote matters. The international community is no longer debating whether reparatory justice is justified, but how justice should be pursued. And to those who argue, too much time has passed. History proves otherwise. The United States compensated Japanese American interns during World War II. Italy compensated Libya for colonial occupations. Justice delayed has never meant justice denied. There is no statute of limitations against crime on humanity. Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Health, I cannot ignore the connection between historical oppression and present-day suffering. The chronic illnesses affecting our communities, hypertension, diabetes, health disease, mental health crisis, these do not exist in a vacuum. And before the opposition blames everything on too much selfish and too little exercise, Mr. Speaker, let's look at generations of violence, forced labor, poverty, and psychological trauma that has not left with emancipation. Freedom came without land, wealth, healthcare, and opportunity. The result was inherited poverty, inherited trauma, and systems many families are still struggling to escape today.
Clause 7 of this resolution calls for funded research into epigenic trauma inheritance. In simple terms, it examines how severe trauma experienced by enslaved Africans continue to affect future generations physically and psychologically. Mr. Speaker, this is not simply emotion. This is science. Additionally, CARICOM 10-point plan also calls for assistance with Caribbean public health crises through mental health support, trauma-informed care, and community healing opportunities. So I ask the opposition, if there are resources available to heal generations of harm, why would we reject them? When a patient is up at JNF with a wound, we do not refuse to treat them because the injury happened years ago. No! We treat the wound because it still exists, and the wounds of slavery still exist in our community. We are small enough that if someone passes on Bastia and sneeze, somebody down in Sandy Point, they're going to respond and say, bless you. Mr. Speaker, reparations are not simply about compensation, they're about healing. St. Kitts was one of Britain's earliest and most profitable sugar colonies. Wealth was extracted from this land by enslaved Africans whose labor-built industries, estates, and economies which they benefited nothing from. The resolution calls for a national reparations recovery fund with participatory budgeting, so citizens, especially youths like ourselves, can determine how reparations are invested. This means investment in education, healthcare, youth development, entrepreneurship, housing, and economic empowerment. This is not about dependence. This is about development. Clause 6 also calls for a reparations curriculum in schools so young people understand Caribbean history beyond the Eurocentric lens. Our children deserve to know not only the suffering of their ancestors, but of their resilience, their brilliance, and their contribution to civilization. The opposition may claim reparations would divide nations, but Mr. Speaker, justice does not divide. Injustice does. Accountability is not hostility. It is about foundational reconciliation. And let us be clear. Reparations are not charity and they're not foreign aid. Foreign aids are temporary assistance. Reparations are the repair of a documented historical wrong.
Honourable Member, I'm going to ask you to start wrapping
Yes,
up.
I'll wrap up right now.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Speaker, in historical debts, if historical debts can be inherited by banks, then surely moral debts can be inherited by government. In closing, the Poet Laureate of Barbados, Esther Phillips, stood before the United Nations and declared that the spirits of those lost slaves are listening for one word, and that word is justice. The echoes of the slaves still live in these regions, in the walls of the estates that still remain across our landscape, in the poverties of families that they continue to battle with, in the unanswered questions about identity, ancestry, and opportunity. But reparatory justice is not about remaining in the past. It is about finally repairing what history broke and rebuilding a more equitable future. The government side is not asking for sympathy. We are demanding what was always owed. We know that hundreds of years of exploitations cannot be paid with silence. The evidence is documented. The precedent is clear. The time is now. Mr. Speaker, the government side stands in full support of this motion, firmly, unapologetically, and without reserve. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I recognize the Honourable Lachelle Herbert, member for Nevis 9.
Honorable Speaker, distinguished colleagues, guests, and fellow members of this National Youth Assembly of St. Christopher and Nevis, good afternoon. I rise as a member of the opposition to respond to the proposal before this House, Clause 6, which is the immediate introduction of a dedicated reparations curriculum within our education system. At the very beginning, let me state clearly and without hesitation that we do not dispute the historical reality of slavery. We do not deny its brutality, its dehumanization, or its lasting impact on Caribbean societies, including small island states like ours. These truths are controversial, they are documented, internationally recognized, and deeply woven into our regional identity. But, Mr. Speaker, acknowledging history is not the same as agreeing with every proposed policy response to it, and that distinction matters. Our federation must be careful that in addressing historical injustice, we do not create policies that are emotionally compelling but structurally unnecessary. Honorable members, according to historical research led by historians such as David Eltis and colleagues through the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, approximately 12.5 Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic Ocean, with the Caribbean becoming one of the central theaters of plantation exploitation under European colonial rule. In St. Kitts and Nevis, sugar production was not just an economic activity, it was a backbone of the colonial system, shaping land ownership, labor systems, and wealth distribution of centuries. This is not disputed history, it is a recorded fact. However, Mr. Speaker, the question before this House is not whether injustice occurred. The question is whether introducing a separate reparations curriculum is the most effective way to respond to that injustice in our modern education system. And on that fact, and on that point, we must be honest about what already exists. Mr. Speaker, it is therefore important to clarify that the themes this proposed reparations curriculum seeks to highlight are not absent from our current education system. In fact, at the CAPE level, particularly in History Unit 2, students already engage directly with the concept of reparatory justice within the broader study of international relations, conflict, and reconciliation. This includes structured discussions on reparations such as historical cases like Haiti's indemnity to France and wider debates surrounding reparatory justice for post-slavery societies. And while I recognize that the government may argue that every student does not pursue History Unit 2 at the CAPE level, Caribbean Studies remains a core CAPE subject taken by a wide cross-section of students across the Federation. As such, students engage with the concepts such as Garveyism, Rastafarianism, and Pan-African thought, including ideas of reparation and cultural return as expressions of post-colonial identity formation. At the CSEC social studies level, these foundational ideas are also introduced earlier in the education system, where students study slavery, emancipation, colonial legacy, and Caribbean development challenges. In addition, UNESCO education policy discussions in recent years, particularly between 2021 and 2023, have highlighted global efforts to decolonize curricula by strengthening existing teaching frameworks rather than creating parallel subject structures that risk duplication. This clearly demonstrates that reparations-related themes, including historical injustice, identity, resistance, and reparatory thought, are already embedded across multiple levels of our education system. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, introducing a separate curriculum risks duplicating material already present in CAPE-level frameworks, instead of strengthening how it is taught and scaffolded across the education system. And in education policy, duplication without structural improvement does not lead to better outcomes. It leads to fragmentation and curriculum imbalance. Honorable members, education must always serve a broader national purpose. It is not only about remembering the past, but about preparing young people for the future. A strong education system must produce students who are equipped in science, mathematics, literacy, civic understanding, and critical thought all at once. When curriculum space is expanded without carefully balanced, we risk unintentionally narrowing focus in other areas that are equally critical to national development. Mr. Speaker, we also cannot ignore the broader developmental realities facing St. Kitts and Nevis today. As a small island developing state, our challenges include economic diversification, climate resilience, youth employment, and long-term fiscal stability. These are not abstract concerns, they are immediate national priorities. While history is important, policy must remain grounded in present-day national capacity and measurable outcomes. Honorable members, let me be clear once again. This is not a rejection of history, and it is not a rejection of reparatory justice. It is a recognition that good policy must be both meaningful and effective. There is a difference between symbolic action and structural improvement. We also recognize that the legacy of plantation economies continues to influence aspects of our development today. However, addressing that legacy requires coordinated economic, educational, and institutional reform, not simply the expansion of a single curriculum component. What we should be focused on instead is strengthening what already exists, improving teachers' training in Caribbean and African history, ensuring consistency in curriculum delivery across schools, and providing educators with the resources they need to teach this content effectively and accurately. That approach is practical, sustainable, and measurable. Mr. Speaker, if we are truly serious about justice, then justice must also be effective. It must produce results, not just recognition. It must strengthen systems, not complicate them. And it must serve the real developmental needs of St. Christopher and Nevis. For these reasons, while we respect the intention behind the motion and the importance the issues it raises, we express reservations regarding the introduction of a separate reparations curriculum in its current form. We instead urge this House to prioritize strengthening existing educational frameworks so that all students receive a balanced, rigorous, and high-quality education that reflects both our history and our future, thereby equipping their minds for exponential emancipation from mental slavery. May it please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member for Nevis 9. I recognize the Honourable Kurt Stevens, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Trade and Diaspora Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of this distinguished House, those in the gallery, those viewing across the Federation, region, and internationally, good evening. Today I rise to make my contribution to the resolution before us, one rooted not only in history, but in justice, responsibility, and the future we choose to build together. There is an African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. For too long, the descendants of the enslaved have been told to move on, to be patient, to be quiet. But patience has never repaired injustice, and silence has never delivered justice. Mr. Speaker, in March, the United Nations General Assembly declared the transatlantic enslavement of Africans the gravest crime against humanity. And true to my portfolio, I was overseas. And I know people like to say that the members are always wasting the government money. But the only wasting of funds was there was bringing the leader of the opposite with me. The word has spoken. The truth is settled. And this government did not stand on the sidelines at that moment. We helped to push it forward. We are a small nation, yes, but never a silent one. So the question before us is no longer what happened. The question is, what will we do about it? Because across the world, this conversation is no longer emerging, it is advancing. Leaders, scholars, institutions have made it clear. Reparations are not radical, they are reasonable, they are justified, and they are overdue. And may I say, long overdue. And still, we hear the same tired arguments. It's too complicated. It's too far in the past. It's too difficult. But Mr. Speaker, let us speak plainly. What they call complicated is accountability. What they call the past we are still living, and what they call difficult is necessary and unavoidable. Let us not be pusillanimous like others, Mr. Speaker. For what was enforced for centuries must be repaired with intention. Because the legacy of slavery did not end with emancipation. It evolved, it expanded, it embedded itself in economic disparity, in cultural erasure, in global systems that continue to disadvantage the very people whose labor built them and still sustains them. And Mr. Speaker, I couldn't believe when the member opposite mentioned that this government should do its SKN homework in Bastia and Kayab. The same homework that put us on this side. That very small, sighted thinking is precisely why certain people remain confined to the opposite side of this honorable house. Because leadership is not merely about managing the present, it's about positioning our people within the future. And if we must understand that those systems were not built by one nation alone, they were built collectively, which means we must address them collectively. This is why St. Kitts and Nevis must lead. Not cautiously, not symbolically, but decisively. Through CARICOM, we are not isolated islands. We are a unified voice and a coordinated force. And when that voice aligns with the African continent, bound by shared history and shared purpose, it becomes a movement, not symbolic, strategic, not emotional, operational, and not temporary, transformational. Because justice at this level is not requested. It is pursued in international courts, in global institutions like the United Nations, and on every stage where truth demands consequence. Mr. Speaker, recognition is not the destination. It is the starting point. To acknowledge the crime and refuse the repair is not justice. It is avoidance. And avoidance has never been a language of leadership. History has already delivered its verdict. The question now is whether we will deliver the response. Will we accept acknowledgement? Will we accept acknowledgement without action, or will we apply pressure strategically, collectively, relentlessly until justice is secured? Because this is not about the past, Mr. Speaker. This is about power now and possibility next. And if we are serious about development, serious about equity, and serious about dignity, then we must be serious about reparations. Not as charity, not as sympathy, but as obligation. So today, St. Kitts and Nevis does not hesitate. We step forward, we lead the region, we strengthen the alliance, and we send a clear message that cannot be ignored. Justice delayed will no longer be justice denied. And as my colleague mentioned, justice is not a favor to be granted, it is a debt to be paid. And whether the world is comfortable with this conversation or not, this generation will continue it, the region will continue it, and history will remember who stood on this side of justice and who stood on the other. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I know we must make a decision at the end of tonight. But before we make that decision, I must say we need to think and ask ourselves, if not now, when? If not us, who? And if not together, then not at all. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the honourable member for that presentation. I recognize the honourable member for Nevis 10.
Good evening, members of the gallery, members of the members of this honourable house, and Mrs. Speaker.
The opposition stands in full agreement that reparatory justice is a legal, moral, and historical obligation. But obligation without precision is negligence. And this honorable House cannot afford to be negligent on a matter this grave. Mr. Speaker, I rise this evening to speak on one critical provision within this resolution. The establishment of a National Reparations Recovery Fund with a 5% annual participatory budget. Because this, Mr. Speaker, is where justice either takes root or quietly unravels. Mr. Speaker, history has already warned us. Look to Haiti, a nation born out of resistance yet shackled by an indemnity so cruel, so deliberate, that freedom came with a price designed to ensure failure. Generations were not just denied wealth, they were denied the chance to build it, Mr. Speaker. That was not an accident, that was structure. And if injustice is structured, then justice must be structured even more deliberately, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a fund without accountability does not correct history any more than it risks echoing it. It risks becoming another system where resources exist, but transformation does not. The opposition therefore stresses that this National Reparations Recovery Fund must not simply exist, but must be governed with strict legislative oversight, transparency, and public participation. The inclusion of a participatory budget is a strong step, Mr. Speaker, but it must be meaningful, not just symbolic. Citizens must have a real influence over how funds are allocated, especially in areas such as education, youth development, economic empowerment, and since this government seems to have forgotten the agricultural sector, Mr. Speaker. I read the resolution. I listened to the Prime Minister read the resolution. Control F on the final draft, Mr. Speaker, and agriculture, you're not going to find it. Which is crazy because we can't be vying for real independence and justice while still looking outwards for food. Mr. Speaker, food. I digress. Mr. Speaker, while we stress the need for a participatory budget, the Reparations Commission, the Honourable Member mentioned, must not be composed solely of the government's political posse, but by invested, unbiased members of this nation, Mr. Speaker. We must also ask for the government for transparency with the other 95% of the fund. Mr. Speaker, we the people must know who decides where the money goes, what specific safeguards exist to ensure it does not disappear into bureaucracy and political favoritism or projects disconnected from the communities it is meant to heal. Because transparency cannot only apply to 5% of justice, Mr. Speaker. The opposition raises this concern not to weaken the resolution, but to ensure its strength endures beyond its creation. Because when we speak about dependency in this context, please, Mr. Speaker, reparations must build systems, not just dependencies. And when we speak about dependencies in this context, we are speaking about something subtle at first, Mr. Speaker, almost invisible in its formation, but deeply consequential in its outcome. Dependency does not announce itself as failure. It begins as relief, as consistency in the absence of struggle, but without proper structure, that comfort can slowly replace construction. What begins as support risks becoming substitution, where systems meant to uplift begin instead to carry. And that is where the danger lies. And to ensure this does not happen, Mr. Speaker, the opposition calls for clear structural safeguards, time-bound funding mechanisms that prevent indefinite reliance, performance-based disbursements tied to measurable outcomes such as job creation and enterprise development, and a mandated investment focus where the majority of funds are directed towards long-term assets rather than short-term consumption. If a national reparations recovery fund is not anchored in transformation, if it distributes resources without equally distributing opportunity, skills, ownership, and institutional strength, then it risks producing cycles of receipt rather than pathways of rise. Communities may receive aid, but not the architecture to stand beyond it, which is why we, the opposition, further stress the importance of matching contributions and private sector integration, ensuring that recipients are not passive beneficiaries, but active participants in their own advancement. Additionally, the Reparations Committee must be an independent oversight body and must be empowered not only to audit, review, but also, where necessary, suspend programs that fail to demonstrate transformative impact. Because, Mr. Speaker, dependency is not born from generosity itself, and mind you, I'm not calling this fund generosity. It is a need, it's something we are owed, but it does not come from generosity itself. It comes from incompleteness in design. Because when support is not paired with empowerment, when funding is not tied to capacity building, when short-term relief is not bridged to long-term independence, Mr. Speaker, then we do not erase vulnerability, we preserve it in a new form, one wrapped in policy rather than history, but familiar all the same. A fund without careful safeguards risks becoming a quiet repetition of the very imbalance it seeks to repair, one where progress is received, not produced, where momentum is borrowed and not built, where communities are positioned as beneficiaries rather than architects of their own advancement. Over time, that structure can weaken initiative. It can blur the line between justice delivered and justice depended upon. And in the most unfortunate cases, it can allow political influence to creep into spaces that should remain protected by transparency and trust. So the opposition warning is simple, Mr. Speaker. Not that the fund should not exist, but that it must be designed to outgrow itself, because true repair is not measured by how long support lasts, but by how fully it is no longer needed. And if we fail to design it that way, Mr. Speaker, then we risk mistaking continued assistance for lasting justice. And that, Mr. Speaker, would not only be a failure of policy, but a betrayal of the very people this resolution seeks to uplift. So while the opposition supports this provision, we make our position clear. The establishment of the fund is not enough. Its management, accountability, and long-term impact are what will define whether reparations succeed or fail. Because, Mr. Speaker, justice is not about what is given. Justice is about what is built. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the Honourable Member for Nevis 10. And I now recognize the Honourable Michaela Peets, Member for St. Christopher 3.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished guests, members of the gallery and members opposite, good evening. I rise today not to dismiss the pain of history, nor to deny the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade, but rather to address the shortcomings and practical concerns surrounding this resolution before the Honourable House. As the final speaker of the opposition bench, I must first express how pleased I am with the contributions made by my learned colleagues who have already highlighted many of the legal, economic, and practical shortcomings of this resolution with clarity and reason. Today, this Honourable House debates the resolution on reparatory justice and the implementation of reparations measures tied to the historical impacts of the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans. But let us first address the misleading statement made by a member opposite. Mr. Speaker, If members opposite are so interested in supermarket encounters, perhaps they would also like to discuss the context of the cat disclosed, but I feel some of the beverages may explain the quality of the arguments we've had today. But I digress. Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge the undeniable truth. Slavery was one of the greatest crimes against humanity. Many were stripped of their freedom, identity, dignity, and humanity. Its scars is deeply rooted within the Caribbean across the African diaspora. No reasonable person in this chamber disputes that. However, Mr. Speaker, emotion alone cannot guide policy, and legislators and representatives, it is our responsibility to examine whether the proposals before us are realistic, enforceable, and capable of producing meaningful outcomes. Members opposite asked this House to support reparations and broad institutional reforms, yet they failed to answer the most basic questions. Who will pay for these reparations? How will these reparations be paid? Who qualifies to receive them? How will these funds be managed? And what mechanisms are in place to ensure accountability and transparency? Mr. Speaker, while members opposite speak about taking trips and building bridges, I sincerely hope those future bridges are not built on using reparation funds. And for the members opposite, please note, when you travel with others, make sure their names are not on the court list. No, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
We're going good. Let's continue to go good. As you rightly said, we're almost at the end. Let's continue to go good. Thank you.
No, Mr. Speaker. I also find it important to highlight that many of the proposals within this resolution, education reform, youth development, public awareness campaigns, and institutional strengthening are initiatives that can already be pursued by our governments today. They do not require reparations to begin. If these are truly priorities for national development, then why are we acting as though progress must wait on foreign compensation? We cannot continuously blame history while neglecting present responsibility. Additionally, this resolution calls for the establishment of commissions, recovery funds, legislation, and participatory budgets, yet offers little detail on how these structures will operate or how they will avoid the inefficiencies and political misuse that too often affect public institutions. Mr. Speaker, symbolic victories may sound good in speeches, but symbolism alone does not build economies, create jobs, and improve schools. Instead of placing all our hopes on legal, uncertain, and intentional divisive reparation claims, we should focus on sustainable development, stronger governance, regional cooperation, and creating opportunities that empower future generations directly. History should absolutely be taught. History should absolutely be remembered, but history alone cannot become the foundation for indefinite financial liability without clear legal, economic, and practical standards. Mr. Speaker, while the intentions behind this resolution are understandable, and obviously the opposition agrees, that historical pain, intentions alone are not enough. Justice must not only be emotional, it must also be practical and enforceable. For those reasons, I urge this House to carefully consider the shortcomings of this resolution before we move forward. Mr. Speaker, if it pleases you.
I thank the Honourable Member for Nevis 11. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance, Sustainable Development and National Planning.
Mr. Speaker, members on the government, on the opposition, members in the gallery, invited guests, good evening. Mr. Speaker, I start by apologizing for my delay in arrival. It seems the opposition was very antsy to hear the fiscal part, but the work of the people sometimes goes longer than we intend to. As I stand in these hallowed halls of the Honorable Assembly, I rise to make my contribution on what is undoubtedly a controversial yet necessary resolution, And I say controversial because of the feedback that I've been getting from some of our constituents. But the pursuit of reparatory justice, Mr. Speaker, for far too long we have been placed at a disadvantage. While on the backs of our ancestors, silver spoons were created. Arguments have been made of why we should move on, we should accept the past. There's other priorities. Can't multitask? Mr. Speaker, but please permit me to read from an article from the Bar Association of New York, where King states, and I quote, author Kristen Mullen pointed out that the United States government has paid reparations to Japanese families who interned during World War II, as we heard, families who lost loved ones during 9/11, to Americans held hostage in Iran. The federal government even paid reparations to slave owners for the emancipation of their slaves in the midst of a civil war. Thomas Kramer, associate professor at the School of Public Policy at the University of Connecticut, detailed how Germany reimbursed victims of the Holocaust and how Haiti was forced to pay reparations to slave owners. Yet, reparations paid to the families of the enslaved remains extremely controversial. End quote. Mr. Speaker, now this statement should sober us up for a moment. So many groups have gone through an egregious and traumatic experience. And at the end of transatlantic slave trade, reparations were paid not to the victims, not to the ancestors, but to those responsible for an egregious act, slave owners. Mr. Speaker, we speak to slavery being in the past, but it is not that far. It's footprints all around us. Let's just take a walk down through Bastille and stare at the basements and the cells that stare back at us, the cobblestones, souls lost in places that seem to not even have become a thought. We walk through Brimstone Hill and we admire the view, we admire the structure, but Mr. Speaker, have you ever stopped to think of the sweat and the blood that was shed to come to this point? Even now, colonial powers still benefit from museums and historic sites that we pay to go look at our history. What belongs to us? We must borrow, we must lend, we must pay to access. Mr. Speaker, it is therefore time that we become serious and very serious about reclaiming what belongs to us. A lot of thought has been put forward that we cannot actually quantify, how will we know what they actually got? How will we know what Britain really benefited from us? But Mr. Speaker, the thought that there is no value added is a fallacy. And at some point, I'll be honest, we have to admit that governments change, like our honorable members opposite, made some bad financial decisions. But the foundation that we started with when we gained independence in 1983 was what was handed to us. No experience, no guidance, and we made the best out of the deal. But at some point we have to, start to take responsibility for certain decisions. But in a document shared by the Repair Campaign, Scalan 2024 stated that the systems that are making you miserable in post-industrial Britain are the systems that slavery made. These practices continue to pervade our systems, workplaces, schools, and our economy, and it is only right that we are compensated for what was taken. Now, Mr. Speaker, arguments have been made that we get grants, we get scholarships. And Mr. Speaker, that's what we're worth. 2 grants. And it's not just 2 grants. It's telling you, opposition leader, I have $500 for you. But for you to get that $500, you have to go run around Bastille 5 times. But before you could do that, you have to ensure that you have 6 pairs of shoes, you have 3 other members with you. Ridiculous requirements. Mr. Speaker, being told how to develop our nations, being told where to spend our money for money that you're giving us that we don't have to pay back. Mr. Speaker, scholarships that are increasingly difficult to obtain with international student costs increasing year on year. This is what we are worth. This is the justice that we must settle for. Let me help us quantify what was taken. Now, I've learned that speaking to your elders is a very useful thing in life. And in speaking to my mentor, I would have learned that in the great St. Christopher and Nevis archives, There are records of the activities of the British planters, well documented. The economic cost, the revenue, the expenditure, the exports, and with their fancy feather pens, Mr. Speaker, writing every little cent, every penny, every euro, every pound that was sent out. And Mr. Speaker, it gives us down to the T of the benefits that Britain got from us. The databases show the funds paid to the owners. When slavery was abolished, slave owners were paid for their loss. Now, if I had to ask anybody in here how much they think they worth, they got to make a price. But Mr. Speaker, according to some of the data, we are worth, if you were a Kittian slave, you were worth 16.65 pounds. And if you are an Division slave, you were worth 17.13 pounds each. So in total, when slavery was abolished, Kittian owners received 329,393 pounds, and Division owners received 151,006 pounds. Now, attempt to quantify the emotional impact, the physical impact, and the social impact. We cannot add a cost to that. So the call for reparations is not simply emotional. It's economic, it is moral, and it is practical. Now, the questions flying around the room is, how will the funds be used? Now, other priorities do exist, but given this is reparations, we want to ensure that the funds are used towards advancing ourselves in a way that slavery would have taken us back. So this government, Mr. Speaker, has always shown a track record of sound financial decisions backed by data-driven evidence and legislation. But Mr. Speaker, reparations are not merely about correcting a historical injustice. They are about building a sustainable economic future for generations. And we have been trapped in cycles of vulnerability to external shocks, climate disasters, fluctuating global markets, and vulnerability to debt. So let's start to educate the members opposite on the direction of the funds. And let's just remember that this is not the annual budget. This is a reparation fund that we want to ensure has impact. So I want to start by speaking on the clause 7 in the resolution. All repertory-related funds will be channeled towards the National Reparations Recovery Fund. This fund, the funds will be channeled through the Treasury and directly transferred to the Reparations Recovery Fund. The Reparation Recovery Fund will therefore not operate as a handout mechanism, but as a national development instrument. The fund would be directed towards areas of development and citizenry concern. It will be managed by a committee of persons comprising of the FS and 4 other elected members, public and private sector. The committee will have subcommittees for special projects, infrastructural development, and citizen development. They will guide the selection of projects for funding and the administration of the citizenry survey. Some of the areas funds will be allocated include 1. Savings. We need to build our fiscal buffers. 2. History. 3. Culture. 4. Infrastructural needs. So that covers the water, that covers the electricity, it covers the agriculture to some extent. And sustainable development, community enhancement. Mr. Speaker, the 5% is just to ensure that we have civic involvement. We cannot repeat mistakes seen elsewhere where sudden inflows of wealth creates temporary comfort but long-term instability. On a quarterly basis, the leads of this project will be required to report updates on the progress of the project, the implementation rate, the impact of the project. These infographics will be shared publicly so that the public could track what is being used, the funds are being used for.
Honourable Member, I'm going to ask you to begin wrapping up.
Noted, Mr. Speaker. To ensure adherence to legislation, Mr. Speaker, we will be ensuring that we pass responsible governance legislation and clearly define the permissible use of reparation resources, procurement procedures, reporting obligations, and penalties for misuse and conflict of interest. Anti-corruption safeguards will be put in place to ensure that funds are utilized as directed, and there will be criminal penalties attached. In terms of climate, I just want to touch climate for my good member on the opposite. We are aware that we did not create this crisis, yet every hurricane season we brace ourselves for destruction. We didn't industrialize the world's economies through centuries of unchecked pollution, yet we are expected to rebuild schools, roads, hospitals, because we are we are limited access because of, like you said, the high income classification. But Mr. Speaker, GDP does not measure vulnerability. It doesn't measure the cost of losing an entire year's economic output for one hurricane. So a lot of people ask, why should reparations and climate be put together? Mr. Speaker, we were put on the short end of the stick. And at the end of the day, we want to aim to use the funds that come in from reparations to ensure that we can build ourselves in the areas that we have been impacted. So today, we stand not as victims begging at a table of former colonial powers, but as sovereign people asserting our right to justice, dignity, resilience, and development. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Minister of Finance. I now call on the Honourable Prime Minister to do his wrap-up.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Speaker.
Mr. Prime Minister, just a caution.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
I'll be diplomatic, Mr. Speaker. All right, Mr. Speaker, I think we can all agree that other than the resolution, firstly, Esther Phipps, a Barbadian poet, and her comments on reparations is the most popular. Other than the resolution, this is the most popular aspect because members of it spoke about it and over there as well too. So clearly we have some poets here. But going into my wrap-up, after listening to the opposition today, I must say that their biggest challenge that they had was not the resolution, not Esther Phipps, not reparations, but it was agreeing with each other. Secondly, it was active listening. The opposition, as usual, they come up with their usual gimmicks. Perfect example, the member for Nevis 10, who came right after the AG, who laid out the legislative framework for the legislation and still comes and asks for the legislative framework. The member spoke about Control F, but perhaps the member, in fact, all the members over there should Control F for active listening. Because clearly it's missing. The leader of opposition said we needed a united curriculum approach to reparations. And then another opposition member complained that the resolution was not focused enough on St. Kitts and Nevis alone. So which one is it? So this is what I'm talking about, Mr. Speaker, in terms of that the opposition has a challenge in terms of agreeing and having a coordinated response. Which one is it? Because you cannot call for regional unity and then criticize the resolution for being regional at the same time. And honestly, Mr. Speaker, the only person not noticing the contradictions in the opposition's arguments, who is not doing their job, seems to be the leader of opposition himself. Perhaps there's a consideration that may need a replacement. But that's not what I'm here for today. No, one member spent a lot of time correcting wording and terminology, and listening to him, quite frankly, it sounded like a walking Oxford dictionary. At one point, I almost fought. I turned to my AG and I told him, we must tell the speaker we should invite him on the drafting committee just to make sure every I's and T's are dotted. Because hey, that's what he came there to do. But this debate is bigger than grammar. It's about justice. And speaking of buzzwords, the opposition leader came and spoke and said that I was talking about buzzwords. So I asked, is repair a buzzword? Is justice a buzzword? Because if justice is a buzzword, if repair is a buzzword in this honorable house, then we truly have a problem. Because reparations, again, is about repair. And if your house is damaged, you ask for repair. Nobody calls that a buzzword. They call that common sense. This is a common sense debate. Mr. Speaker, another member argued that slavery is irreparable, and in one sense, he is right. We cannot undo centuries of suffering, but that does not mean you do nothing. That is why reparations are about acknowledgement, accountability, education, and repair, where repair is possible. Then we heard arguments about climate injustice and who suffers the consequences of problems they did not create. And in fact, the member opposite for strengthening our argument. Because small island states like St. Kitts and Nevis contribute very little to global emissions, yet we face rising seas, stronger hurricanes, and enormous climate costs. So yes, historical responsibility still matters. And Mr. Speaker, the fourth speaker, said that Caribbean students are already learning these issues about reparations in school, and the member referenced a subject in terms of the higher level, the tertiary level, and that's tertiary level is not mandatory. There are many persons who are not doing Caribbean studies, and when you look at it, let's be honest, how many students are actually engaging in history at the secondary level when history isn't mandatory? So, I actually welcome the suggestion in terms of strengthening teachers and civic education, and this government is going to consider that in the resolution. Because reparatory justice is not only about policy, but it's also about knowledge and transferring that knowledge. People who do not fully understand their history will always struggle to defend their future. And finally, there was a point about why not focus on the progress right now? Why focus on reparations? But, you know, the progress is happening. It is happening across St. Kitts and Nevis. But that progress is significantly delayed because of the injustices that were done to this federation. We are lagging behind when we compare ourselves to the first world countries, when you compare ourselves to the United States, when we compare ourselves to the United Kingdom, we are lagging behind, and that's because of the injustices. So, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, throughout this debate, the opposition spent more time debating wording and technicalities than debating the injustice itself. One says reparations are too unrealistic, one says the resolution is too regional, and another says we need regional unity. Again, what is it? At some point, this stopped sounding like an opposition strategy and started sounding like a group project nobody prepared for. I remember earlier I spoke about the group project. So, and remember I spoke about in terms of in the group project, they enjoy the big salary, contribute very little, and hope that nobody asks any question at the end. Same thing the opposition is doing here. But despite all the contradictions, one thing remains true, and I want everybody here that's listening to remember that history happened, exploitation happened, and the effects did not disappear overnight. Professor Hilary Becker said it best: reparations are not a matter of charity, they are a matter of justice. And this is what this resolution is about: justice. Justice for generations whose labor built wealth they never benefited from. Justice for Caribbean people still carrying the weight of colonial history. And justice for future generations who deserve truth instead of silence. So this government makes no apology for supporting this resolution, because leadership is not avoiding difficult conversations. Leadership is having courage to face them honestly. May it please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you to the Honourable Prime Minister for his wrap-up. The debate having ended, the question is that the resolution by the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association advocating for reparatory justice, a youth call for decisive action, be hereby adopted. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. A resolution by the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association advocating for reparatory justice, a youth call for decisive action, has hereby been adopted.
Adjournment.
I recognize the Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask that this Honourable House be adjourned, and on the adjournment, I would like to express my thanks to the Repair Campaign for your collaboration with the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association on this very important topic. Elsie Harry, who is a former alumni, she came to our association saying, she wants us to debate this, and we were ready and excited to debate it. We've been preparing for this debate since about January, I think, March. Okay, but the conversation started in January. So we've been preparing for it for quite some time. We had trainings from Carla Astafan as well as from Taliba Byron as well. And those trainings informed our discussions. Coming out of this debate, we are looking to compile all the information and share that with the repair campaign as well as other stakeholders. So on behalf of the SKNIS National Youth Parliament Association, we say thank you for collaborating with us on this very important topic.
Thank you, Honourable Prime Minister. I recognize the Honourable Leader of Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, with your leave, I rise to share the same sentiments of the Honourable Member opposite in thanking the repair campaign for their contributions towards the sit-ins and for the contributions to reparatory justice all over the region, Mr. Speaker. With your leave, I would also like to once again thank the young people here today for putting in their time, talents, and efforts to once again pull off a next Youth Parliament sitting. And this is why we must continually to allow the young people in our country, in our community, and we must continue to give them the environment to express themselves, give them enabling environment to express themselves. And to the young people listening, watching, never ever allow anyone to tell you that you are too young to give your opinion. Never let them tell you that you are too young to be included, especially when the decision affects you, the legislation, the policy affects you. I think I can remember a quote always repeated by our dearly departed Mr. Malachi Ferguson, where he always used to say, take up space, Mr. Speaker. With that, I'm much obliged.
Thank you, Honourable Leader of Opposition. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the adjournment, I rise as the Minister of Finance, both for the sitting and literally for SKNYPA, to express our thanks to the general public, to the sponsors for the sitting and the repair campaign. We appreciate your support and for believing in the young people to execute the plan that we would have discussed. We do want to say a huge thank you to the community. This year, SKNYPA will be celebrating its 25th anniversary. And this is a big anniversary for us, and we hope to do it justice in our celebrations, but we want to start early by saying thank you to the community. Over the first half of the year, we have had several initiatives, our most recent being our breakfast. And we want to say thank you to the community for your support, your continued support, to the businesses, the small businesses, the persons who go out of their way to help us. We just want to tell you that we appreciate your support, we appreciate what you are doing for the young people, and we are trying our best to ensure that the quality that you see, that you receive from us, is quality that you don't get anywhere else. But we do want to say thank you, and we use this opportunity to tell you to look out for SKNYPA. You will be seeing a lot more of us, and if you have any suggestions or any ideas in areas that you want to partner with us, we are always open to partnerships. So feel free to reach out to us, and we thank everyone who would have watched and participated today. Thank you.
Could I have a seconder for the motion on the floor, please?
Mr. Speaker, I beg to second the motion.
Thank you. The question is that this sitting of the Youth Assembly do now stand adjourned, signed aye. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. This sitting of the Youth Assembly hereby stand adjourned, signed aye. Thank you, everyone.
In the top stories this evening, the IMF has recognized meaningful progress across tourism, energy and the financial sector in its latest assessment of the St. Kitts and Nevis economy. A World Food Programme mission is assessing school meals and nutrition initiatives in the Federation, and the Secretariat for Human Security and Well-being and community stakeholders are working to strengthen support for young people through Own Your Summer 2026. We have the details of these stories and more after the break.
This Mother's Day, get mom that wow to wear from Quartz Optical. Select frames from our 2026 collection with 50% off frames for her. And with our payment plans, you can style mom today and pay later. So come on in. Find mom's wow so she can wear her wow with new frames from Quartz Optical. Value you can see. Offer valid from May 1st to May 31st, 2026. Conditions apply.
It's something that you can't put into words. A buzz in the air. From the time you wake up, you're ready to go. The freedom, the fantasy, the fete. To know it is to live it and love it. You have to experience it. If you know, you know. Angostura White Oak Rum. New look, same vibes inside.
Thank you for tuning into ZIZ's Major Newscast. I'm your presenter this evening, Ebony Brandon. The International Monetary Fund has recognized significant progress across several key sectors in its latest assessment of St. Kitts and Nevis's economy. Stay-over tourist arrivals have exceeded pre-pandemic levels, outperforming the Eastern Caribbean regional average. Delta, American, United, and Air Canada have all expanded or resumed services to the Federation. Over 778,000 cruise passengers arrived between October last year and April this year, up 8.4% over the previous year. Cruise homeporting is planned for late 2027. The Federation's renewable energy transition is also advancing. Geothermal drilling is set to begin in the second half of this year, and solar energy bidding is expected to commence shortly. The government is